I think it's an interesting opportunity. The objective behind Akin is it's one that's worthwhile. So I'm excited to see how the collection ends up. So I started drawing since I was a kid, like most artists, but I very early in my life, my mother noticed that I would draw things in 3D, so I would draw different views of objects instead of drawing just, oh, my favorite car. No, I would draw my favorite car in 6 different views, like if it was in a cube and I was looking at each face. Instead of houses and suns and your family, I would probably draw, well, I would draw graveyards and make like drawings of ghosts in chalk and then paint over the entire thing with blue paint, where the paint wouldn't adhere to the chalk, so you'd see the ghosts once you painted it. I've always had that artistic itch, and later in my teen years I had the option to go to either science or arts. I could specialize in one of them, and I just felt that arts suited me better. I enjoyed doing what an artist does more than I enjoyed doing what a scientist does. So I decided to pursue arts. Eventually, this culminated in me learning 3D and learning animation, and now I am the artist you see right now before you. So the single word idea, it's something I've done a few times. It's a way to basically challenge my creativity. Instead of focusing on very large and complex concepts, which can by themselves have sort of a look by default, I instead decided to focus on a single word, a more abstract concept, and I tried to have very different looks, very different feels to this word. And after sketching a bit and messing around with ideas, integrating my own thoughts and experiences into the piece, the results are what you see in the gallery now. To describe myself, impulsive. Definitely impulsive. I am very much not a person who thinks a lot about what he does. I react by instinct a lot of the time. And I'd say impulsive is a good word. I mean, if my low self-esteem was speaking for me, I'd say mediocre, but trying to be a bit more positive, I'd probably go for either antagonistic or perhaps it's kind of hard to come up with a word for it, but it's made for the outcast, so I would say I think antagonistic towards certain sensibilities of the human mind would be a good way to look at it. So antagonistic in that sense, yeah. Well, one I use very often is to simply draw very basic shapes, so a bunch of circles, a bunch of blobs, very abstract things, and then work them into a more concrete shape, a more understandable concept visually. I usually use this method when I'm just bored and I really need something to pull my creativity out. It's sort of an exercise to get the creative mindset going. I also tend to go for walks and just draw things based on people and things around me. Something I used to do a lot when I was a teenager on my way to school was I would get on the train and look at the people around me, and I would just draw cartoon characters that looked like these people. Very exaggerated, crow-looking old men, or very interesting looking women with their huge heads of hair. Stuff like that would always it would always have some fun results. Lastly, there's the obvious one. I do have quite a few nightmares once in a while, simply due to my mental health, and it's one of the ways I used to cope with that symptom of my illness is to draw. I draw what I see in my nightmares. I draw what I feel those nightmares do to me, and I just take those little pesky demons and I put them on paper so they leave me alone, which is not only a good coping mechanism, but it has resulted in some of the work that I find more interesting out of the libraries of stuff that I do. Yeah, like I said, one of my coping mechanisms would be to draw these things. I also deal with my more manic episodes, let's call them that. I also deal with those episodes in a very self-restricting way. So I have my room ready for when I have an episode like that. I don't have any sharp objects around. I try to ground myself by looking out the window and naming things and the colors of things. And obviously art always plays a big part in how I cope with these situations. So I can sometimes just sit down and, when I start feeling a bit anxious, I just doodle. It doesn't need to be something concrete. It can just be just a bunch of scribbles. Just because I'm focusing on doing something with my hands, it also helps for me to have something that I can control. So that is one of the most useful coping mechanisms that I have. Coincidentally, it also helps my work, so that's, happy coincidences. I don't think important would be the word I'd use. I think it's important that people realize that mental health is a problem that a lot of people, more people than the public realizes, have to deal with. When it comes to my work, I think it's more important that people look at it and enjoy it, or they don't even need to enjoy it, but they need to have some sort of reaction to it. It needs to make them think to some extent. I feel that's way more important in regards to my work, rather than just making them consider some real world concept like mental health. I think the fact that that my mental health helps me make this work, and in turn this work helps my mental health, is way more important to me than it is to the viewer. That said, obviously, if someone looks at my work, looks at the situation I'm in, and finds some sort of inspiration to help others, that's always a plus. So I used to do a lot of charcoal drawings. It's basically where you take a bit of burnt wood and you just scribble a paper with it. Creates these very uneven, chaotic patterns if you don't know how to control it. It was useful for me to learn that type of art, but I eventually settled on just using traditional means, so pens, like ink pens, if I need to do some really thick lines, but mostly it's pencils, usually graphite, and I usually do black and white. When I want some color and when I want some more creative liberty, what I usually do is I take my computer and I use virtual programs, mostly Photoshop, Illustrator at times, and I use a tablet with a screen behind it, and I try to use my traditional methods in a digital medium to create some interesting pieces. That's where I usually mess with lighting, color, very strong shadows, even though black and white does need those. I feel like that when you accentuate a shadow in a virtual medium, it becomes more intense in a way. It's not the focus, it's just something that adds to it. So I quite like making digital pieces, and obviously in 3D I dabble once in a while, though it's not my favorite medium. It is something that I find interesting to do once in a while. Well, if I'm just considering the impact it had and will have on me, I think to some extent it has given me a reason to explore certain methods that I hadn't. When I was first working on all of this, I was specifically working on something that would end up in a t-shirt. So I was considering the fact that people are going to wear this, and I didn't want to make something that was absolutely disgusting, as some of my work tends to be sometimes. So I had a lot of limitations when it came to the creative process, but I also had a lot of freedom in some aspects. For example, the piece Rats has, a bunch of rats running down the sleeve. Rats are something most people don't consider particularly pleasant, but I believe the way I made them, it may make some people who wouldn't usually think of wearing a shirt with a rat on it, I think it'll make those people consider it, and just that makes me kind of proud in a weird way. So, Akin Gallery, I think they'll give me a bit of a extra portfolio, and so far it's already given me a few contacts that I can use in the future to get my work moving in directions that I didn't think it would. So I think it overall had a really positive effect on me. As the collection is finished and we're going to launch the company, I currently am working on podcasts with my friends. I'm working on my own pieces in private. I'm working on learning more, expanding my horizons, so to speak, in professional terms. And hopefully in the future I would find a job that allows me to have some creative freedom. Hopefully I can find something that allows me to be creative. If all else fails, Akin Gallery basically gave me something that I can point to and say, look, I can make these things, so I can work as a freelance. And this is part of my portfolio. So overall, it's helped me prepare for some more options for the future. So yeah. Well, definitely the works I'm going to make in the future, but I think there are a couple of pieces that I would eventually like to expose to the public, which have never actually been exposed. Reason being they are fairly personal, but I would eventually like to build up the confidence to put them out there and see what people think. Even if it is something negative that people will say, I still think it might be worth at some point. I think these pieces will, they'll benefit from some exposure eventually, even if they do disgust people to some extent. I think it's always nice to have people's sensibilities challenged. I mean, that's kind of difficult, but I would like to illustrate one of Edgar Allan Poe's poetries. If the guy was alive, I would love to meet him. But yeah. As for people who are alive and about nowadays, I would definitely love to work with the creators of the Darkest Dungeon game, especially Trudy Castle. She seems like such a fun person to work with. Her ideas and her style, just they are so innocent sometimes, and she can also make really creepy things following this style. So I find the her whole style super interesting. So I'd love to work with her one day. Definitely I'd love to just work with the entire team, but Trudy Castle is one of the few that I would love to at least have a conversation with, just exchange ideas.